I was asked by Dr. Ali to talk for this summit, and I blurted out, how about I talk about frequency and make it simple for people to understand? I quickly realized my mistake and that I was then super anxious, okay? Because how was I going to take such a mysterious spiritual concept and make it simple? So here I am, taking on this challenge. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is get out a bottle of peppermint and put some on wherever you like to put it, smell it, because it's going to help us to focus and to understand more clearly the message that I've got for you guys today. This is a topic that has always fascinated me. I think the reason why is that it isn't a topic that we really learn about in school, right? There's a lot of things we do learn, but it seems like this is the area that we really seem to skim over. I have realized in my own research that the parts we skimmed over in school are actually the key to understanding the truth about our health. So I wonder why they're skipping it in school. But it does require thinking about things in new ways to fully understand. So I'll do my best today to lay out some action items for you to do more research after this talk today on your own. So why did I become so fascinated by the topic of frequency? I probably, like many of you, have had some very interesting healing moments using essential oils. Physical ailments like boom, gone with the touch of one drop. It doesn't happen often or all the time, but it has happened. And so usually it's with an oil that I reached for completely by chance and wasn't based on a whole lot of thinking. It was just primal instinct without much deeper analysis. Have you ever had that experience? I wanted to try to understand why. My journey led me to reading a lot about the impact of emotions on our bodies and the ability of emotions to cause disease. So then I asked myself, what are emotions and how can an emotion cause disease? How do oils help me with such emotions? And what are the oils doing inside my body? And down the rabbit hole I've been for almost a decade, right? So let's start with this simple train of thought. When we think of energy, we often think of electricity or radiation. What if we apply that thinking to our bodies just for the next hour or so? I often think about my own energy in terms of how much sleep I got the night before, but it is a lot more than that. Our bodies clearly have energy, so let's just take some time to think about our health and wellness in these terms, like we are an electrician instead of a physician. Yes, we have organs and body systems, but let's just for today think of our bodies as a collection, a mass of vibrating cells and bacteria and fungi and all that good stuff, okay? Side note, when I think of cells, I think of like a round glob of some watery gel kind of stuff. That's the cytoplasm. And a little thing in the middle, a smart thing called a nucleus, doing some neat things with my DNA, right? I think we all kind of think that, right? But I recently saw a video that opened my eyes to so much more about my cells. And it was then that I realized how amazing our bodies were designed. And I'm using a new streaming app here, so bear with me a second while I share the screen so that you can see this video too, because it is super cool.
What you're about to see is going on in you right now, everywhere in you. We're going to let you look briefly at a cell made by the chemistry department at Harvard University, which was getting a little worried that it wasn't getting chemistry majors. So they thought maybe they should do something jazzy. So they know that textbooks in chemistry, the chemistry always looks like circles and very boring. So they said, let's just actually make it like it is. So
this is basically what's going on in your cells right now. These are different fibers assembling, disassembling your cells. This is a molecular machine that walks around in your cells right now. It's called a kinesin and transports things. So, for example, when things want to move around your cells, they don't just float around randomly. They actually actively moved around with little machines, little robots, nanobots that power your cells. what you see here is actually an amazing machine coming out of these little pores, which actually assembles other machines. This is like the factory floor of your cells. It's called the ribosome. It reads your RNA. RNA is, comes from the DNA. It's translated into RNA, and then it basically gets read out by these ribosomes, and they make new machines which then do other things. So there's all kinds of machines in your cells, things that rotate, things that walk, things that make other machines, things that read RNA, things that copy DNA, that open,
Let's look at this again while we talk about it.
So pretty neat, right? Pretty cool stuff happening inside our cells. Like a lot more than just this round thing that we learned about. It's like a beautifully choreographed symphony working nonstop to express who we are and to process things from coming in stimuli and all kinds of external inputs coming in from so many different places. We are so elegantly designed. I won't even use all the complicated terms like proteins and ligands and ribosomes like he was just using. But at the most simplistic level, let's just get back to the essence of the watery part versus the nucleus part. Those are the things we all kind of learned about. And I think it's those two forces and their essence that is key to understanding health and also frequency. So bear with me for a bit. In your body, you have two types of DNA. The DNA, which gives you all the qualities that we think about, like your hands, your fingers, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, your hair color, and everything like that. And then you have another type of DNA, our mitochondrial DNA, which only comes from our mother. So let's think of the egg and the sperm at fertilization, because I mean, we're talking about cells here, and cells generate new cells all the time. The watery gel part, that cytoplasm part, is from like the woman's egg. It looks like that too. And the nucleus part comes from the man's sperm. Interesting, right? The watery part contains our mitochondrial DNA, which is actually a bacteria. Super weird. And that part is like an ancient computer. And that's also like our battery. Okay. Our energy resides in that watery, gelatinously part of our cells, that cytoplasm. And every time you lose a skin cell, for example, the cell gets reborn with a new mitochondria, with that new mitochondrial ancient DNA. If you have a mitochondrial defect in your genetic code, then you're kind of actually screwed. You can't fix that. You can't do gene therapy on mitochondria DNA. You can't really do anything. You're just kind of done. So if they say that you have, hey, you've got a genetic mutation in your mitochondria, then that's not good. So obviously this watery part of the cell is like super important to life. Okay, so let's keep that in mind for the rest of the talk today. But we always learn more about the nucleus part of the cell and that DNA, which is like what gives us brown or blonde hair. So it's kind of curious to think about why that might be. The watery gel part of our cell binds to hormones, chemicals, emotions, thoughts. Each of those create subtle changes to the computer, that mitochondrial DNA's configuration, which is then translated into a specific action within our cell. So our ability to accept stimuli and inputs and turn them into action is part of the watery gel part. So that's super important. It is also important to know that we must constantly make new cells to replace those cells that are worn out or damaged. Did you know that we replace our gut lining every 2 to 3 days? We replace our skin every 6 weeks, and we replace our liver every 8 weeks. I know. We need to ensure we provide a comfy space for all of the good kinds and right kinds of bacteria and fungi to live symbiotically in our bodies. I mean, didn't I just say our mitochondrial DNA is actually a bacteria? Our bodies are actually 99% bacteria. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. And we are dependent on them and they are dependent on us. And at the most simple level, I think most of us know what can damage our cells and our bacteria and all that kind of stuff. We know that toxins create damage in our bodies. But what's also equally important to understand is our ability to make new cells that work and how we can lose that ability. And what exactly is toxic to us that limits and disrupts that cellular communication? So is it just chemicals and pesticides? Is it emotions too? Is it thoughts? Because we said that watery gel part takes in all of those stimuli. And it bears repeating that the watery gel part of our cells contain the mitochondria again. And if we don't have that, if we don't have mitochondrial DNA, if that's damaged, then we don't have life. So disease really happens when that watery gel part of our cell deteriorates at the simplest level. If the mitochondria is damaged, then we are permanently damaged. So we have to keep that part of our cells super healthy. So the question we can ask ourselves today is, why can't I make new cells that work? Okay. It is at this point in the talk when we're all like, wow, that was super fascinating and mind-blowing, and I'm glad I put on my peppermint. But what does that have to do with frequency? Glad you asked, because I asked myself that same question when I was writing all this down. So many chronic diseases seem to be characterized by low energy in some way, shape, or form. So my thoughts in this talk today come from many different sources, including Dr. Stewart, Dr. Cowan, Dr. Tennant, obviously my time spent with Gary Young, and also emotional healers like Carol Truman and Louise Hay, and truth tellers like Tori Maris. And I'm not sure if you attended our last Young Living convention, but if you did, you likely heard both Dr. Ollie's talk about frequency and Mary's talk on energy as well. With Dr. Ollie's, you likely learned that all this talk about frequency isn't new age or woo-woo. It's simply fact. Our bodies are electric, and we measure these things in modern medicine in many ways, like with EKGs or brain waves. So, that's energy. These are all constructs within our body that show us that our bodies are electric. Mary said something that really stuck with me too. The term emotion is derived from the Latin term immovere, which means to stir, to agitate, to move. Hence, emotion is referred to as a stirred up state of an organism. So truly, emotions are energy in motion. So if we combine all of this, we can demystify and simplify our thoughts on frequency. Because when we understand that our bodies are 70% water, like I just described, that's that structured gel-like watery substance in our cells, which contains the mitochondria battery. And without that battery, we would deteriorate and die. You can understand how truly electric we are. So if we think of our bodies as electric instead of a sense of, a collection of organ systems, then we can think outside the box on how to stay healthy and well. Everyone seems to have a different term for this energy. Scientists or physicists, right, call this energy electrons, right? It's atomic level, quantum level. Acupuncturists call it chi. Yogis call it prana, and we all heard of chakras. Whatever name you use, the entire universe and everything in it is all about that same movement of energy. This is where the discussion gets a bit mysterious, because we want to understand this energy with our logical brains, and to a degree, we can. But in reality, this energy is in the quantum realm, and anyone who probes into understanding exactly how our bodies work to create new life, new cells, because that is new life, sees a higher power at work, whatever that higher power is for you. For me, it's God. And that is quantum mechanics at a very simple level for someone who's not a scientist or a doctor. Dr. Tennant wrote a book called Healing is Voltage. And in that book, he paints a wonderfully simplistic analogy to help us to visualize our bodies as electricians rather than physicians. So our ability to make healthy cells throughout our lives depends on our voltage. And voltage is the stored potential to do work, as in make cells. Amperage is the movement of electrons doing that work. When electrons move from one place to another, we call that current. Whenever electrons create a current, there's always a magnetic field 90 degrees from the direction of the current. Stay with me here, because it is important to understanding frequency and how the oils work in our bodies and why we can use so many different oils for so many different things. Electrons forming a current always move in a vortex, a torus, okay, not a sine wave. The frequency of a current is the distance between each revolution of this vortex of energy, okay, and is measured in hertz. 1 hertz is 1 revolution per second. 100 hertz is 100 revolutions per second, and so on and so on. At first, I used to be very confused about the difference between voltage and frequency, as they seem to be used interchangeably. Tenen explains that one can think of a voltage as the power or amplitude of this vortex of energy, while frequency is how many revolutions or oscillations the energy makes per second. So how it vibrates, okay? Both are important in understanding how our cells work. And now this is where it gets really, really cool. I'll lay out much more simply what I researched, but because we just got so technical. But you're likely wondering what my point is. My point is that each cell in our body is designed to run at a specific voltage and frequency. You didn't think God left that up to chance, right? Each cell was beautifully designed to resonate at a particular frequency. So it's not just one optimal frequency for our entire bodies, but different frequencies and voltage for every cell. Heart cells resonate at a particular frequency and voltage, so our heart organ must then resonate at that level. What this means is that we are like one big symphony of harmonic notes playing together. And when one gets out of tune, it impacts the whole. So generally speaking, when cells have too little voltage and are running at too low a frequency, that's when the disease happens, because that is when we get really bad at making new healthy cells to replace the worn out cells. But guess what? Let's take this a little further and take this to plant energy to really make the point clear. What molecules make up ponderosa pine, for example? We know of a few, but probably not all. Gary spent a ton of time over the last 3 decades cataloging any molecules he could identify in each species, even oils which had never been distilled before, like Dorado Azul or Plectranthus oregano from Ecuador. Young Living has a huge database of these molecules. It's this symphony of molecules that make an oil work for what our cells need, and just, instead of just being something that smells nice, like a perfume. And when you can distill the oil to get the best harmonic notes, just think tons of molecules at just the right frequencies working in concert and express, that you really get this fantastic oil that does exactly what God intended it to do. Gary told us a story once while explaining some of this. I mean, honestly, why would Gary need to know how to read a GC lab report? Why would he spend so much time training with wild crafters and distillers in France and in Turkey to learn this? Literally traveling there multiple times a year after year for decades to learn how to get an oil to express the right kinds of molecules in the right way. Why was he driven to know this? And why didn't he just care that lavender smelled like lavender?
Just part of because, and why do I do this? When I could be skiing or snowmobiling or fishing. Good question. But, I look at these molecules as the essence of God. And that's why I said last night, it's very sacred to me. You're dealing with life, and you're dealing with an essence that is more powerful than any tangible substance on this planet. And there's only one thing that has a frequency equal or greater than the pure oil, and that's God's frequency itself. And so every time you put a drop of oil on it, you put a drop of God on your hand or on your body or wherever. And that is sacred. And I have to tell you just a little story to reiterate and reinforce what I'm saying. I spent 5 years trying to get to meet Mr. View, because Mr. View at that time, back in the late 80s, 1985, when I went to Europe the first time to study, was when I heard his name, of being and having the reputation of the greatest distillator in the world. And they, would joke, say, Mr. View has distilled everything, including rocks. Well, I thought that was pretty significant until I became a distillator and a farmer and realized that it's really easy to distill rocks because they get in the crop. But anyway, so I wanted to learn from him. So I kept trying to find him, and I'd talk to people, and I'd go into the Alps in Provence, and because they said he lived high in the mountains, looking for him, and I couldn't find him. And so when I met Jean Noël in 1991, I said, Jean Noël, have you ever heard of Mr. Henry View? And he said, yeah, I've heard of him. I said, have you met him? And he said, no, I haven't met him. And I said, do you have any idea how I can find him? And he said, yeah, I'll find him, because he said, he lives just a few kilometers from Cederone. And he said, I'm sure I can find him. And so I said, well, I would really appreciate it if you would. So he went to work trying to find Mr. View. And now this is 5 years from the time I first started looking for him. So Jean Noël called me up and he said, Gary, he said, I finally found Mr. View, and he's agreed to come to my house for dinner. He says, and I can set that up when I know you're coming again. And I said, I'll be on the plane tomorrow. Now, that was back in the days when I didn't have much to do. So I got on the plane and I flew to France and drove to Jean Noël's house, because he lived north of Cederone, just 3 kilometers. And Mr. View came to dinner that night. And oh my goodness, my heart was just racing. Here's this guru of distillation, and that I wanted to learn from. And so Jean and Jane had a big round table in their dining room, and their children, Nicholas and Verena. Nicholas was 6 months old then, he's now 24. And Verena was 3 years old. And she's coming this spring to work in the lab at Young Living. So I grew up with these children, and I feel like I'm kind of their distant papa in a way. But so we're sitting at the table, and Mr. View is sitting on my left side. And through the entire meal, he's speaking with Jean Noël in French. Doesn't even give the time of day for me. I'm just this American guy that he could care less about. And Jane, she's from Sacramento, and they met when she was working in the summer job in a Swiss resort. And so her and I are conversing in English. And if you've ever been to France, when you eat a meal in France, it takes forever. And so you have the appetizer, and then you have wine, and then you have the meal, and then you have wine or water or whatever you drink, and then you have cheese, and then you have dessert, and it's just like it goes on forever. And I'm just getting more anxious because this damn meal is going on forever. And I want to talk to Mr. View. And he will not even look at me. And then I start getting antsy and nervous. And when the dessert was finally finished, and he was sipping on his wine, he just turned abruptly and looked straight into my eye, and he reached over with his right hand and put it on my left forearm, and he just closed it firmly, and he looked into my eye and he says, Mr. Getty, what do essential oils mean to you? And I felt paralysis. And I just said, this is my test, and if I blow it, and I, how you are when you're taken by surprise and you're trying to find the right words, and you got to say the right words or it's not going to happen. And that's how I felt. I just thought, and I couldn't find anything to say. And I just closed my eyes for a second. I said, God, help me. And I just spoke what came in my mind. And I looked right back into him and I said, Mr. View, I believe essential oils are the closest physical, tangible substance to God on this earth. he never let go of my arm. He just continued the grip, and he stared into my eye without blinking. And all of a sudden, the tears rolled. And then he held up his left finger in my face, and he goes like this: "You are absolutely right. And anyone who messes with them should be treated as a criminal." And then he just said, "Thanks for dinner." And he got up and out the door. Never said another word to me. And my heart just went right down into my pit of my stomach. And I just thought, oh no, what did I do wrong? And so John Noel, he got up and he said, "Well, I'll walk Mr. View out to his car." And I got up and helped Jane clear the table. And I walked into the family room, and I'm standing by the fireplace, and I put my arm up on the mantle of the fireplace and put my head down, and I'm just thinking, I want this. John Noel come walking back in. And he walks past me to the bedroom, slaps me on the shoulder, and says, "Gary, you better get to bed. Mr. View wants you on the mountain at 6 a.m. Wow. Holy cow. I never even touched the steps or the floor, and I didn't even lay in my bed the whole night. I just levitated. I was so excited. And so we drove up there, and then he invited me to stay so he could teach me distillation. And I stayed with him 2 weeks and rolled my sleeping bag out on the floor of the old distillery by the boiler and fed the boiler at night. And then we'd walk up on the mountain during the day with our little knives and our knapsacks, and we'd cut wild lavender and wild thyme, and then come back. And he just had small distillers of 2,500 liters. And he taught me about distillation. And then he'd take me into his laboratory and teach me about the molecules and how to mix them and how to compound them. It was an amazing time. And then I went back 3 times a year for 5 years after that, and worked and learned from him. And then I'd stay and work a couple of weeks at a time with Marcel, and then learn, the habits of the lavender so I could bring it home and plant, and which I did. And I smuggled the first lavender.
Amazing story, right? And I think it brings to light the exact point that I want to make here, and that is the distilled part of the oils that's so important. But even if we had all of the parts of, say, ponderosa pine, and we knew what all those molecules and constituents were, if we had all those piece parts sitting on a table in front of us, it wouldn't be a pine tree, right? We know that the collection of the parts isn't really the whole. There's something else there. So what makes the collection whole is what's mysterious about all of this. What makes life? So what do we do when we distill a plant into oil? What does the essential oil separate from? It separates from the water, right? The water. And so what we're basically left with is a vapor. A vapor that is a collection of molecules all resonating at various frequencies in search of somewhere to conduct their energy. And we have the perfect conductor in our cells. The watery gel part of our cells has some really cool properties. It has infinite binding sites, and anything that binds with it produces instantaneous effects throughout the entire cell. So now back to frequency. Knowing all of this about our bodies, how do plant oils impact our frequency and our emotions and our health? You guys, again, our cells resonate at different and unique frequencies, and our oils are not liquids, they are vapors. Vapors are like gases. That's why when we smell them, they are vaporizing. So when we apply an oil to our skin, it immediately passes through the skin and carried around the body into each of our cells. And the cells that contain an infinite number of binding sites or receptors for every molecule that the body uses. So these receptor sites are molecules, aka frequency specific. So our cells wait patiently, vibrating, sending out these frequencies, right, to see if anything vibrates back in a complementary way and a compatible way. This is why when you find the right oil with the right molecules for what you need in that particular moment, then it works so instantly. And it's so shocking because when you use an oil that, may be super awesome, but it isn't the molecules that you need in that specific moment, then you may not notice something as shocking. Okay. It's still going to be awesome, but it's not going to be as shocking. So different things resonate at different frequencies, as do different cells in our bodies. So it's like finding the right lock and key. Pro tip. Okay. Walk in faith, not by sight. If I have heard so many stories from people on oils they decided to use for this or for that, that I found the selection to be a bit quirky, but I don't say anything because, hey, if that's what they wanted and they got the results that they wanted, then who am I to question it? You see, we all get bombarded with so much information. And usually these stories are that I get from people with quirky oil selections is someone who knows nothing about oils. Someone who comes into my home and is not feeling so great that day and decides to use one of my oils and doesn't do that much thinking about it. They just pick one off the shelf that's, obviously speaks to them, and they use it and they get instant results. So again, we get bombarded with so much information. Use this for this and use this for that. But there's always, hey, there's this awesome recipe that worked for me and you can use it too, and it's going to work awesome for you. But honestly, we are all uniquely made. You are uniquely made. And the more you listen to your body, the better you will be able to tune in to what you need. A few years ago, I noticed that Valor essential oil bottles for me always seemed to be leaky. My bottles always felt greasy because Valor was always leaking out. And I thought something was wrong with the bottling at Young Living of Valor. It always seemed to be bubbling up and out of the bottle every time I opened up my bottle. I posted about this once in one of my Facebook groups, and to my surprise, every comment was, oh, for me, it's peppermint, or for me, it's RC, or for me, it's stress away. So it wasn't any one type of bottle that was leaky. It was like each person had their own oil that always seemed to leak for them in their purse or when they grabbed it or whatever. So it's just after many discussions over the years, I've kind of come to the conclusion that the oils do simply vibrate and bubble out of the bottle if that's what you need in that moment. And I tend to just love to use Valor. So that's the one that seems to always jump out of the bottle at me. It's like, come to mama. Totally. So we don't want to overthink it. An example of this is to kind of think like a dog, right? I don't know if you have a dog, but you can totally try this on them, a dog or even a baby. If you have, get your dog nearby, grab a couple of oils, maybe 5 or 6 or something, and then, start to open one, okay? And the dog will either run away from you or jump in your lap and smell the bottle and maybe even sometimes lick the top of the bottle. It's just that simple. I mean, you can either, you really can only use, they only want to use what they need and they don't think about it. They're just using primal instinct. So again, walk in faith, not by sight, and learn to get really good at listening to your gut. Your body knows what it needs. We don't need to overthink it. When the brain gets involved, the brain overpowers our gut brain, which is our gut instinct. Okay. So you can do this trick, grab or stand up in front of your, oil rack, like I've got back here, and just grab the first oil that pops into your head without overthinking it and use that one right away and see how you do. So much of health is personal. Only you know is what is going on with you emotionally, physically, spiritually. And many times we don't really know what kinds of buried emotions or needs there are. And so if you overthink it, you're going to maybe select the wrong things, which doesn't harm you in any way, of course, but it's like kind of cool to just release control a bit and give it up to God. Like Gary said, he didn't know what he was going to say, but he just stood there for a second and said, God, please help me So you can do the same thing when you stand in front of your oils. God, please help me pick the right oil, and just grab one. Okay. As much as I try to explain this, it's not really easily explainable. I understand. But this helps us to understand why God gave us so many things here on this earth and in this universe to use for healing our bodies. We seem to have lost touch with that part of our intuition, that part of ourselves. We really want to only focus on the tangible facts and figures. But really the intangible parts of us, those watery, mysterious gel-like substances in our cells that creates life, is really the way we vibrate. That's our essence. That's our frequency. And that's tied to the essence of all life. It's all tied with that similar kind of ancient mitochondrial DNA type things. Plants have those too. That's a bacteria, remember. So we all kind of stem from the same place. Again, coming back to the basic question that I asked and posed earlier for us to ask ourselves is, how can I get really good at and awesome at making really great, healthy cells throughout my lifetime? Health is keeping our cells happy and in good order, okay? Frequency is in all things created by God and the entire universe. It's that central, vital life force within us all, and humans and everything in the universe are connected via that one thread. So healing at this energetic level is actually more spiritual in nature than physical. You can kind of get that by how I was teaching you how to select the oil to use. So we need to look at things at healing with new eyes, and we need to look for things in healing with the right kind of energy. So it's not then that surprising that it's pretty simple, that eating really good food, traditionally made and not processed, drinking healthy, clean water, getting sunshine, walking barefoot outside, petting a dog, hugging, cuddling, and holding someone's hand, thinking kind thoughts about yourself, speaking kind words over somebody else, praying, meditation, all of these things actually raise our frequency. That's what conducts really awesome energy in that watery gel part of our cells. So moms, I have a question for you. Have you ever noticed that when your child is about to get sick, they get super clingy to you? They want you to hold them. They want you to rub their back. They want you to be touching you. They're grabbing their arms. They want to physically be near you. And that is for a specific reason, because they're trying to raise their frequency to better fight off whatever it is disrupting their cells in that moment. So that is the optimal time before they're showing symptoms to apply oils. Cleanliness is your cue to get that frequency up. Frankincense is usually my choice to apply to them every few minutes in that time, because it has lots of molecules in it, which covers a lot of ground across your body to maybe find a cool spot to vibrate in harmony with one of the cells in your body, and to hopefully fix whatever's going on. Also, it's probably good, to have them near you, and it's good for you and for them to snuggle with pets that you have, because apparently pets are a pretty cool tool to raise frequency too, because they go and run outside and they don't have shoes on. Like, we wear shoes most of the time outside, but we actually get energy from the earth. And so do our pets, and they get all kinds of good electrons and all kinds of awesome energy going on. And when they come back inside and you pet them, that transfers to you. So pretty cool. Another cool fun fact is that, when you take a shower, you raise your frequency. When you take a bath, you lower it. It's kind of interesting too. So that's why I think when we take showers, we often are really good at thinking, and we get energized and we can sort through problems. So that's usually when I do my best thinking, is in the shower. So the other thing that, obviously, the flip side of doing all these great things to keep our frequency up, is that we must also avoid the toxins that damage our cells and damage the mitochondrial energy in our bodies that kill this battery. Estrogen mimickers, pesticides, damage to our microbiome or gut dysbiosis, chemicals, certain drugs, vaccines, and even electromagnetic fields and negative toxic emotions. These toxins impair how our cells are designed to work by God, which is never a good thing, because when you mess with nature, nature fights back, right? So we can always fight back, and we can use this truth to fight back and to understand what things to avoid and what things to do more of. For I will restore health to you, and I will heal you of your wounds, says the Lord. This is from Jeremiah 30:17. God does not work as mortals work. Man wounds with a knife and heals with a bandage, but God wounds and heals with the same thing. I appreciate you taking the time to dive into this with me today. I am sure you're going to need to rewind and listen again and again. Again, some of the books that I referenced, I don't think I have them all sitting in front of me, but I love this book by Dr. Thomas Cowan, The Cancer and the New Biology of Water, where he explains a lot more depth about the cells and the energy. I love The Chemistry of Essential Oils by Dr. David Stewart, and also Healing is Voltage by Dr. Tennant. So I hope you enjoy learning more about how your cells work, because it is super important to understanding how best to use your oils and how to raise your frequency. Bye-bye.